Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Kia ora, I'm Zoe George and welcome to the October episode of Fair Play, a podcast covering women in sport, from athletes and results to current affairs and issues. This podcast is made in association with Wisp Sports, Locker Room and RNZ. If you're into podcasts as much as we are, check out RNZ for politics, crime and lifestyle podcasts. And if you want your sports injection, check out Wisp Sports and Locker Room for everything to do with women in sport. This month, we chat with former Olympic athlete Beatrice Faumuina about diversity and life after sport. American academic Dr Nicole La Voi about the importance of sport academia, the role of men in women's sport and media coverage of women. We bring you another Cricket World Cup 2021 profile, and of course it's not fair play without an update from the toilets at the Basin Reserve. This month, we chat with leading UK researcher Dr Rosalind Stanwell Smith about the Royal Society of Public Health's research into public toilets, titled Taking the Piss. This month's co-host is now a regular with Fair Play. She's a life member of the New Zealand Sports Journalists Association, has been a sports journo for more than 20 years, I think, paving the way for female...
You're so kind.
She's been paving the way for female sports journalists and is the founding editor of Locker Room, one of our partners here at Fair Play. It's Suzanne McFadden. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Zoe.
Always love having you here on Fair Play, and it's so fantastic that we've got this incredible partnership going between RNZ, Locker Room and Wisp Sports.
It sure is. I'm really loving being part of it.
What have been the big stories for you this month?
Well, it's been a real celebration of women's sport this month. We've had the success of the Silver Ferns, the continuing success of the Silver Ferns in the Constellation Cup, and we've had the Kiwi Ferns winning the Women's Nines, the inaugural World Cup Women's Nines in Sydney. And, of course, the Farah Palmer Cup has been a great display of the strengths in women's rugby in New Zealand at the moment. So I've really enjoyed highlighting those successes. It's been great.
Why do you think it's important that we highlight those stories?
I think the public need to be reminded that our women are performing incredibly well on the world stage. We're world champions in so many sports. And just a little reminder, you know, it's worth watching. It's brilliant sport. And these women are great role models.
Also leading the way at the moment is the IOC working group who's aiming to address the gender equity balance at the Tokyo Olympics next year. Ashley Abbott, who's from New Zealand, says Tokyo will be the most gender balanced in Olympic history, but also says more needs to be done in the media to address that. She says currently 80% of accredited journalists at Rio, Pyeongchang, were male, and they're looking at giving more accreditation to women, creating opportunities for female journalists to participate and to create more balanced reporting. So I'm going to put my hand up for that. What do you reckon, Suzanne?
Yes, I think we should both be there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's the right thing to say, it's the right thing to do, but at the moment, good luck finding that many sports women journalists, especially in New Zealand. I think that's a huge part of the broader problem, is that we need to be encouraging young women into the industry, but also creating more jobs for them. I think that's a real problem at the moment.
Earlier this month, also, we managed to bump into each other at the Women and Girls in Sport Summit in Wellington, hosted by Women in Sport Aotearoa and Sport New Zealand. Women's participation, as well as media coverage and involvement in sports at all levels, was a hot topic for the summit. And there was something like 350 delegates attending to discuss issues around accessibility, leadership and diversity. Suzanne, for you, what did you get out of the summit?
I think the most important thing for me was the networking, meeting women who are making a difference in sport in New Zealand. Women like Fran McEwen, who found the Shift Foundation in Wellington to get more girls active. Fran's an amazing woman. She's just about to run the Oman Desert Ultramarathon. That's 165 kilometres across the shifting sands of the Oman Desert. And that's all to raise money for Shift. So amazing women like her. And also, to me, I think the thing that really resonated with me was listening to the next generation of young women sports leaders who are already out there doing their thing. And they were just so confident and so positive. And I feel like women's sport is in a good place going forward.
Something else that kind of jumped out at me when I was there was the head of sport New Zealand, Peter McSkimmon, thanking the men in the room. What did you think about that?
It probably wasn't an appropriate comment to make at a women's sports summit. But in a way, I kind of got what I think he was trying to say, and that if we're going to really make change, it's going to be about changing the mindsets and the attitudes of the leaders in sport in this country, and the great majority of them are male. And until we change their thinking, and also, the male viewers of sport, if we need to convince them to look at women's sport. And, we can preach to the converted, women, and as much as we want, but to make real change, we have to change the mindset of men. So I like to think that's what he was getting at.
Well, that's definitely something that keynote speaker Dr Nicole La Voi talked about. She's a researcher from the Tucker Institute in the US, and she's a leading figure in sports academia, addressing topics from female coaches and leaders to media coverage and funding. And I got to sit down with her and talk about why academics is so important to sport.
The academics drive the data. Because without data, we don't know if change is occurring or not, or regressing. And so we provide the baseline for change and assessing change. And data should drive strategy. And data should drive the conversation. And data should drive social change movement. So I think that's really our primary roles, to provide meaningful, verifiable, accurate data.
And what kind of data are you getting particularly right now?
Primarily right now, we're collecting the next round of our Women in College Coaching Report Card, where we document the percentage of women coaching women at the collegiate level in the U.S. That is, my team and I are collecting that data right now. So that is just basically counting people, but it's an important piece of our data.
What are we finding? Are women coaching women at this level?
Some are. Many aren't. The majority of women college athletes are being coached by men. It's about 60% are being coached by men. Now we're trying to get that to go up, and it's creeping up ever so slowly, maybe 0.1 or 2% a year. But we're trying to really push the needle a little quicker to get to 50% in 5 years.
So it must be interesting being at the Women and Girls in Sports Summit here in Wellington, where the Minister announced a $2.7 million funding initiative to get more women into high-performance leadership and coaching. That's got to be a glowing tick for New Zealand, right?
Yes, it is. And ironically, New Zealand is not alone. The Canadians have been given funding from their minister and Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. They've gotten $30 million.
Whoa!
To be dedicated to gender equity and girls and women in sport. Now, I would love it if our government in the U.S. would like to give us some comparable funding to
yes, please.
Yes, please, to fund those initiatives. So I think New Zealand and Canada are really on the leading edge of this movement.
We're talking with Dr Nicole La Voi, who's over from the Tucker Centre. Tell us about the Tucker Centre. It is the place to go, isn't it, when it comes to research for women and girls in sport?
Well, we are the first research centre of its kind in the world, solely dedicated to the study of girls and women in sport. And we're at the University of Minnesota, so we're not a standalone research centre. We have a structure within the School of Kinesiology in the University of Minnesota. We like to champion ourselves as a leading voice and advocacy arm for collecting and disseminating data around the world to help people create change within their own contexts.
One of the interesting things that the Minister, Grant Robertson, spoke about at the summit that we were at the moment was talking with the Broadcasting Minister around how to better improve coverage of women and girls in sport. What does your research say? Because here in New Zealand, it's only about 10% of sports coverage is dedicated to women and girls in sport.
Oh, well, that's higher than it is in the U.S.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Last data we've collected, well, we haven't collected, one of our Tucker Center affiliated scholars, Dr. Cheryl Cookie at Purdue University, and her research team does the Gender and Sport Media report, and they have found 2 to 4% of all sport media coverage is dedicated towards female athletes. And we know that 43% of all our athletes are women, so the coverage is very disparate and disproportionate.
Why do you think that is? I mean, that's such a big question because there's lots of reasons, but why do you think that is?
Well, the simple reason is power. Who benefits when we don't see girls and women in active, strong, powerful, athletic role models? And the answer would be it keeps the system in place. And that system right now in the U.S. and traditionally around the globe is it keeps men's sport at the center of what is most visible and seen and important and valued.
Yeah, it's very, very true. We're finding with our coverage, we get a lot of, obviously we've got the Rugby World Cup happening, so a lot of the All Blacks, and it's exciting, they're doing really well.
And the women's sevens,
the
is in the U.S. right now, in Denver.
They're doing very well. But yes, it's really interesting, particularly with our sports coverage. There's a number of sports that more like 2 or 3 sports that dominate that top spot in our sports news. And we find when we talk about female athletes in New Zealand that we predominantly talk about their coaches or their families or their lifestyles rather than their athletic ability. Are you finding the same thing in the States?
It's the exact same. So the first trend we know is that sportswomen are disproportionately seen in the sport media, and when they are, their athleticism is minimized and marginalized, and their roles as traditional women, as mothers, as wives, as girlfriends gets highlighted, and their sexuality and femininity get highlighted over athleticism.
I do find it interesting that the traditional feminine sports, particularly here in New Zealand, like netball and hockey, get a lot of coverage, but we are seeing more coverage of the likes of rugby and cricket, which is great. But yeah, to start with, it was those feminine skirt-wearing sports. And I'm like, it shouldn't matter if you're wearing a skirt or shorts or pants or whatever, just as long as you're competing out there and doing well.
Yeah, we rarely see women in what we call power performance sports. I think rugby would fall into that category, powerlifting, soccer, basketball, ice hockey in the U.S. We rarely see women on mainstream sport media. Now, I do have to say, though, being in New Zealand, I have seen a lot of women's rugby on TV. You never, ever see women's rugby on cable television or mainstream media in the U.S. Never. I don't think I can ever remember seeing it, not once.
Wow. Well, you might have to come back and watch some more rugby with us
well, I love
when
it.
the Rugby World
see
Cup's on.
Rugby 24/7 on 3 to 4 channels. It's pretty amazing.
Sport is part of our national identity here in New Zealand, and it's something that we hold very close to our hearts, particularly when it comes to rugby. But that is starting to change. We are becoming more culturally diverse. But again, the accessibility for those who do not come from traditional backgrounds when it comes to sport, our Maori and Pacifica people, again, are low representative in sports accessibility. So how do we make sport not only gender diverse, but diverse for all people?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we have learned in the Tucker Center is that you have to ask girls and you have to ask women in these diverse communities, what is it that is missing? What would you like to do? What are the barriers you face? And then they will tell you. They're very clear. And then, given the data, then you direct strategies and policies to help different communities be physically active, because it's not all the same.
No. One of the things that was brought to our attention at the Sports Summit was that Sports New Zealand head Peter McSkimmon thanked men in his speech today.
Yes, he did.
But what roles do men play in promoting women and girls in sport?
A big role. maybe the most important role, because the men hold most of the positions of power, and no social change movement happens without the people in power. So we need men, we need more male allies to be active in that social change movement. And I think I have a slide, a gender ally continuum from allies to men that are very hostile towards gender equality. And I will challenge the men in the room and the women in the room to identify the men in their lives of where they are on this continuum. How do we bring the wannabes and the men who actually want to get it right, but they're just afraid or they don't want to say the wrong thing, and it's the Me Too movement, and they're sort of hesitant. How do we move them to allyship so we can really work together to create change? We need the men. We absolutely need the men. However, he also mentioned that, or there was a question in the audience about that there's often backlash with boys and men when they see resources like millions of dollars going towards to support girls and women. They say, well, what about me? Now we're being reversely discriminated against. And that, to me, is that's fake news. That's just not true. Boys and men are doing just fine, and they will continue to do just fine, and it's not a zero-sum game. We can give resources and opportunities to girls and women to equal the playing field. It's not about taking it away from boys and men, and that's part of the narrative that we have to educate when we hear pushback on that. Well, what about the boys and men? Yeah, I get it, but you're not being discriminated against, so just stop.
That's Dr Nicole La Voi chatting with me earlier this month at the Women and Girls in Sport Conference in Wellington. Nicole has also just joined the WISP Sports podcast roster. Her podcast is the Tucker Centre Talks and can be found at wispsports.com. Also at the summit, Suzanne McFadden, our co-host this month, was the Minister of Sport, Grant Robertson, and he announced a new $2.7 million fund to support female leaders and coaches in high-performance sport. What do you think, Suzanne, this means for pathways for female leaders?
I think it was great news because, the government had already committed $10 million over 3 years last year. So this was kind of a boost in an area that, it's an area that we really need to solve for one of the biggest problems in sport, and that's getting more women in positions of leadership. I think the number of female coaches in New Zealand sport is really poor. There's less than 30% in high-performance sport, and I think across the board there's probably 10%.
Yeah, I think it averages out to about, I think the minister said 19%.
Yep,
so
yep.
I was like, oh my gosh. Really?
That's
terrible.
Isn't it? Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah, so I know as part of it, there's a program to put women in high-performance positions in all the national sports organisations. So, just to inject them straight in there. So that's a start. But, man, there's a lot of work to do.
And, there's also been quotas put in place to have 40% women on sports boards in New Zealand. And actually, the government have said that they're going to start pulling funding if they don't reach that target. But that whole question around quotas was a really interesting one, and that was put to Dr Nicole La Voi. And at first she said she didn't believe in quotas, but she said if you want to make a change and make it fast, then quotas are necessary, which I thought was so interesting.
Yeah, me too. I was really amazed by that, and that she had watching it work, and she'd observed that, and that she changed her mind about it. So yeah.
Well, anything's possible. Someone else who was also part of the summit was former Olympic discus thrower Beatrice Faumuina. She was there listening to the minister's announcement and was part of the panel discussing diversity in sport. I was able to chat with the multi-gold medalist turned ambassador and dancer about her life as an elite athlete and the path she's taken following retirement from the elite world. I started by asking about the minister's announcement and what it means for women in the sport.
It means that from this moment forth, anyone who wants to be in this space has an opportunity to do so. Do not shy away from this opportunity. This is a real opportunity to see more women involved, engaged, but also being mindful that if we don't step forward, the next generation will not have an opportunity to progress because they will look sideways, they will look to the front and go, who was before me, can I learn from them? And if that space is empty, then we actually need to look upon ourselves and say, why didn't we promote somebody into that role?
How difficult was it for you when you were an elite athlete with the lack of women in leadership and coaching? Was that hard for you, or how did it affect your career?
Oh, look, I was very fortunate that my first coach, the dear Miriam Stanley, she was someone who at the time she had a family, but she was really accommodating to try and help me out. And that has been a part of this whole journey. Is I've been very, very fortunate to have had people who have said, hey B, we'll help you out, and I also knew that I wanted to do the best by them. So thanks to Miriam and her dear family, this is how this all began, because had I not met her and others that were supporting me in that framework from Auckland Athletics, from my Oraka Athletic Club, none of this would have happened. And ironically, it came from parents and mums and dads.
Actually, that's where it starts, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mums and dads.
Exactly. It's all the parents who are, then, much like now, are wanting to see their children succeed. And by doing that, it's trying to find the time to be there for them, to get them from A to B, making sure that they're safe. I mean, the environment that I was able to actually compete in and actually grow was so different to what it is now. Now, opportunities may be more now, but the understanding of how to be safe has changed. You can't go to your local park. You can't go there, without any parent supervision. Now it has to be make sure there is someone there, make sure that there's safety involved, make sure there's someone qualified enough. If you have a medical emergency, someone can perform CPR, which is all good things, but then that just puts another level of potentially why we're not seeing this success come through.
We're talking to Beatrice Faumuina, arguably one of our most successful elite athletes.
Not sure about that one. But
we're here at the Women and Girls in Sports Summit today, and you've been part of the diversity discussion. Mm-hmm. At the moment, we are seeing more Māori, Pacifica, those with disabilities come through into sport. But how do we encourage more? How do we create those pathways for those people to step up?
Yeah, look, this is where I talked about earlier today. It's being absolutely engaged in the community that you want to see represented. I think there is some ideas of how to help, but if you don't involve communities from that area, from that department, section, whatever it is, age group, gender, you are really missing the beat. And it's a shame, because when you do go out into the community and say, hey, we've got this wonderful idea, this is how we want to improve engagement, but fundamentally this is how we want to build trust within our community, then we've missed it. When you actually engage with our community right from the beginning and say, hey, we're seeing that there isn't an increased number of participation, what are we doing wrong? And actually taking that hand on heart and saying, hey, we haven't done this right. And this is a way forward for us to do it correctly, because there is some stuff there where, for example, the family itself, how the family actually operates, what's important to them, and understand how that can facilitate their ability to actually participate in sport. Because we all love sport. Sport is what we've always nicknamed, it's a family within a family. But then we've also been able to identify the skills that's within that group where we help each other out. And when sometimes that's missing, then you just go, okay, what have we missed altogether?
Beatrice, for you, you had a successful career as an elite athlete, and now have moved on from that and are doing other things. How did you make that transition from elite athlete into working for the government?
Different, I know. I know, there's the awkward pause, everyone goes, really?
Yeah.
But I think if you fundamentally want to still serve and support New Zealand in a really dramatic way, and hopefully are a part of that discussion, this is the journey that you take. Every time I've looked at a role and thought, geez, that's something I'd want to do, I always think, how's the impact on that for our community? And I'm talking Pacifica, I'm talking New Zealand. Is someone else going to come through, or would they even be wanting to come through next? And when I think of my athletic career, we were talking about it earlier today, about what it was like winning the first world title and what did it mean after that. I said, it literally meant we're learning as we go. There was no template, you couldn't learn off other people. And so there was kind of the excitement, but also the real challenge of going, what is next? What does this mean, the direct impact if we do it well and nurture it over time? In that template, I've done it in my career after sport, which was identifying key people that understood what I wanted to do. Hopefully they came on board. Coaches, mentors, that was a common thread right out through my career, because I think if I was able to test my thinking with others and they would go yes or no or why, That was pretty much what being an athlete taught you, is that you had to think on the spot, you had to make the tough call. And earlier today I said, sometimes you're going to have to make the brave decision or make the comment that makes you unfavourable, but if it elevates others, then that was the right thing to do.
Final bit of advice before you go. What would you say for those who are currently following in your footsteps, who may be elite athletes or maybe starting out in the grassroots? What would you say to them?
Remember why you did this, why you chose this path. I think it's really important to remember those values and to hold on to those values while you're enjoying this journey. Have people around you that are close enough to keep you on the right path, or at least advise you about what's the journey ahead of you. I've always talked about faith and family and friends, and then there's these random acts of kindness that come along the way, which are people that you've never thought you'd meet, but then you find out that you're learning something. And you'll never have all the answers. I think if your mind is open to knowing that you'll never have all the answers, but you're on the journey to seek them, the journey never ends.
Former Olympic discus thrower Beatrice Faumuina. Suzanne McFadden is our co-host on Fair Play this month. One of the main themes, Suzanne, from the summit was diversity. What role does the media play in helping diversity in sport?
I think we've got a huge role to play. I think that we can get caught up in covering the same thing too often, covering netball, covering women's rugby, and that's all important. But you also need to look at the different groups within those sports, or within smaller groups within groups. So I think it's really important to introduce role models to different cultural groups in New Zealand, that for Muslim women, that there are, sporting avenues, and Muslim women are playing in different competitions in sports. So there's just so much that can be done to highlight, the importance also that sport plays in communities. And I just think that we have to look beyond just covering, doing match reports and telling people what they already know. I think there's a lot of work that can be done.
Let's move on. We continue our series of bios in the build-up to the Women's 2021 Cricket World Cup. Today's interview is a journalist who smashed the glass ceiling in New Zealand. She's a committed journalist who tells important stories about women in sport, from netball to sailing, and issues affecting women in sport. She's been leading the charge to get more female athletes in the media and in front of audiences. Her work has been published widely, including in the New Zealand Herald, the Bay of Plenty Times, and the Australian Women's Weekly. It's today's co-host, Suzanne McFadden.
Are you serious? I didn't know who you were talking about then. I was like, oh, wow, she sounds amazing. Oh, my God. Honestly, thank you.
You're welcome. Why did you get into journalism?
I had wanted, when I was about 8 years old, I wanted to write novels. And I didn't realise that didn't pay money. I just loved telling stories. And I had a cousin who was a radio journalist, and she encouraged me to look at journalism. And all I wanted to really do was write about sport. I played sport at school, but I wasn't a great star. But I loved the stories. I used to cut out, I had scrapbooks of the Black Caps and Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games. I would, cut newspaper clippings and stick them in. I think my mum still got them. And I was just fascinated with the stories behind sport. And I think I've been really lucky that I've been able to forge a career in it and still telling stories.
What age? Because there's some of us who, I knew at 12 I wanted to be a journalist, and it's been 20-something odd years now since then. What about you? What age did you go, this is exactly what I want to do? And what did you go to, Polytech, or did you just throw yourself in and do a cadetship?
I was probably 15 when I was convinced that journalism would be a good thing. I was quite shy, so it was quite a scary thing. I came from a small town, and the thought of going to live in the city and work on a newspaper was quite daunting. I went to what is AUT now, but it was ATI then, and in those days the journalism diploma was 6 months. 6-month course, and you used to come in at 8 and you'd go home at 5, and it was intense, but we learnt so much was packed into that 6 months. And in those days you could just walk out of there and choose a job to go into, so I was really lucky. I mean, that was back in the late 80s, I have to admit. But I was really lucky that I got an opportunity at the Bay of Plenty Times. I had only wanted to work at the New Zealand Herald.
Oh.
And I went into their headquarters in Albert Street and spoke to the sports editor there, Bob Pearce, and really thought that I was going to get a job. And he said, I want you to go and work in a provincial town and work in a newspaper and be a general news reporter and learn everything you can and then come back to me. I cried all the way home in the bus because I just thought I was going to be working at the Herald as a sports journalist. I had no idea. I was so naive about how difficult it was for a woman to get into a sports newsroom. But then I got this wonderful opportunity at the Bay of Plenty Times in Tauranga, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my journalistic career. I was only there for a year, but I learnt so much from covering court cases and town planning hearings, and I got to cover netball, a game that I had never played in my life, and 32 years later I am still covering netball. And the features editor said, look, I think you'd be great at writing profiles of athletes. And so I did that once a fortnight, and I think that was the turning point in my career, really, that I realised I wanted to tell the stories of sports people, and that became my strength, was writing profiles about sports people.
It's so interesting when because you said that, you went to regional news and as did I. I wanted to go straight into the big cities, but it's such an important stepping stone. It really is, because that's where you hone your craft, and that's exactly what journalism is. It's a craft.
It is, and I totally tell journalism students now to try and go to the provinces and work and experience a bit of everything, because in that way too you know exactly what it is you want to specialise in.
Suzanne McFadden is our co-host today. So you founded Locker Room. When did you set that up?
It's probably just over 18 months ago now, and it is within the wider newsroom.co.nz website, which was founded only a year before that. In fact, the Locker Room was launched on the first anniversary of Newsroom. And we had a sports room within Newsroom, which was running general sports stories. But we were very clear about that we didn't want it to be just about match reports. In fact, we don't have match reports. We look a bit deeper and a bit wider than that. Then we decided to go all out and just go women's sport. And it was a pretty brave move of the owners of Newsroom, Tim Murphy and Mark Jennings, to say, yeah, let's do this. And we decided to do it, and we were doing it within a week. And I think if we'd stopped and thought about it, maybe we wouldn't have gone so gung-ho. But I'm really glad that we did.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a shock to the system, but I'd like to think that in that 18 months it is making some headway for coverage of women's sport. We're definitely getting a lot of followers. We've managed to have some great relationships with other media in New Zealand, like Radio New Zealand and Stuff and now Sky. And it just means that the stories get a wider reach, and I think that's really important, that it's not about clicks, it's about getting these stories out to as many people as we possibly can. And I've really loved that cooperation between different media organisations. 10 years ago this wouldn't have happened, but I think we all realise in this industry that's under a lot of pressure at the moment that maybe this is the best way to go.
This is meant to be a Cricket World Cup bio, so do you like cricket?
I love cricket.
Right, yes.
In fact,
that's the correct answer. No.
In fact, it was cricket that probably sparked my interest to become a sports journalist in the first place. And I played cricket at school. I was the captain of the school's first 11, and a very small school, I just hasten to add. And I fell in love with the Black Caps, and I would, during summer, stay inside and score test matches off the television, which was really sad. But there was just something about it and they were winning. That always helps. That kind of sparked my interest in wanting to know more about them. I memorised all of their birth dates.
Wow.
Which is really sad. But if I think now, that was part of my training to become who I am and what I'm doing. So, yes, I love cricket, and I'm incredibly excited that we're going to be hosting the Women's World Cup in 2021.
For you, what interests you most about the fact that we're hosting this event?
I think the fact that we're going to have teams from around the world playing here, and that young girls are going to be able to see the very best cricketers in the world playing on our fields, And we've seen what effect, the Football World Cup has had on young women. And I think something like this will just send the numbers of girls playing, hopefully, through the roof. And it's something that cricket has been working on to grow the number of girls in the game, and I think this is the perfect boost at the perfect time.
Well, New Zealand Cricket are currently advertising for Head of Female Engagement and World Cup 2021 Legacy, which is because I emailed them asking, and they said that it's a leadership position, which is fantastic. They've made it quite clear following that Beeman report from, was it 2015, 2016, that found the fact that New Zealand Cricket had neglected women in cricket and what they needed to do to rectify that. And then at the summit that we were at a few weeks ago, talking with board member Martin Snedden about the importance of attracting more women in a whole range of capacities, not just as an audience and watching cricket, but playing cricket, coaching cricket, scoring cricket, umpiring, what that might look like. Because for them, that's the future, that's to keep the game healthy in New Zealand, which I thought, we already know this, we've known this for some time, but it's, we were talking before about men in leadership positions who are helping us, make that change. And for me, he's one of them. Like, he sees it, he understands. Martin and I also had a big discussion about toilets at the Basin Reserve. He's well aware of my ongoing discussion around the improvements. And of course, it's not fair play without an update on the toilets at the Basin. Last month we heard how work had started on the museum stand, and this month we're taking a bit of a different approach. Last month we talked about research out of the UK from the Royal Society of Public Health called Taking the Piss, and among the researchers is Dr Rosalind Stanwell Smith. She's an expert in public health with a focus on water and sanitation. Now, the study found that the lack of public toilets disproportionately affects people with ill health, disability, the elderly, women, outdoor workers and the homeless. That lack of facilities acts as, quote, a loo leash, deterring as many as 1 in 5 from venturing out of their homes as often as they would like. And that rises to over 2 in 5 among those with medical conditions requiring frequent toilet use. 56% of the public restrict fluid intake due to concerns over lack of toilet facilities. They found also 59% of women reported they regularly queued for a toilet compared with 11% of men, and that a fair ratio of toilet provisions would be at least 2 to 1 in favour of women. Which I found fascinating. And the recommendation...
These are fascinating, absolutely fascinating figures.
They're good, aren't they?
Yeah.
And also the British Toilet Association, the recommendation from them was for at least as many female cubicles as there are cubicles and urinals in male toilets. I spoke to Rosalind earlier this month, and she said, although we're fighting for equality now, access to toilets for women and others has come a long way since the early days.
And of course, when toilets were first brought in, they didn't even provide toilets for women. In the late Victorian age, they thought that it was indecent and that women wouldn't even think of it. They didn't mind. In the working class areas, they made it legal for women to go in the gutter. And in fact, it is still legal for women to do that as long as they don't cause a nuisance. And so the whole idea was that for respectable women, you didn't need toilets. And of course, it was a problem. It kept women at home. And until the big department stores started opening, places like Selfridges, there weren't places with toilets. If you think what men had, they had gentlemen's clubs, they had toilets on the street, there were toilets attached to pubs. All of these were male only, or either urinal-based or so disgusting that very few women would have wanted to go into them. And so the whole precedent started with we don't really need to provide them for women. And I think in the modern age, when we know that we want people to get out and about having more exercise, it's become to be more politically relevant that we really should be encouraging men, women, children, old people, disabled people, anybody to get out and about in the fresh air much more. And that means we've got to provide toilets.
Dr Rosalind Stanwell Smith is our guest today. Yes, providing more toilets for all, because toileting and having access to toilets is a basic human right.
I would say so, although I don't know if it's been recognised as such. I mean, there is the universal targets on sanitation from the WHO. And of course, I think one of the problems is that we look at the countries that have almost nothing, that don't have enough toilets in the houses, that have poor sanitation, and we feel we shouldn't really complain. But I think we do have an obligation to keep up standards, to show what can be achieved. Even when every person in Africa and India has a toilet in their house, they will still need toilets in community areas. And with an increasingly mobile society, I mean, what we found in our survey was that 1 in 5 people say they don't go out as often as they like because they're scared they won't find a toilet. And actually on the health side as well, we found that more than half, something like 56%, restrict drinking, that's fluid intake, water and tea and so on, before they go out in case they can't find a toilet. And that is dangerous. It's bad for the kidneys, it gives you headaches, it's just bad for your general health. And so the fact that we are, if you like, encouraging people to do that seems very worrying at a time when we do have a policy on trying to support public health.
You also found that there was a survey done in 2017 that 59% of women reported that they regularly queue for a toilet, compared with 11% of men. Not surprising, is it really, though?
Well, and I don't know if any women listening, if you've ever tried to make a charge into the men's. I have done this on a few occasions. It does cause quite an excitement. Often I've found on these occasions when I've gone in, I'm the only one. The others have fallen back. It's quite a scary thing to do. But for heaven's sake, why don't we make the toilets open to both when there's a crowded venue? And I think if men had to queue, we'd have had more toilet legislation by now. Because women, by tradition, I mean, I know we have a reputation for moaning, but we don't really. We don't moan publicly. We don't make a fuss. So that I think there is an issue that women have put up with this, when in fact, say, women with young children, with no nappy-changing facilities, don't like to make a big fuss about it. And I suppose if we look back to what I said about toilets being for the respectable and stop street fouling in the early 1900s, I think some of those ideas still persist, that it's really not quite respectable for women to need public toilets at all.
I mean, who would think that women need to go to the toilet? Well, that we pee at all, right?
And I think there's lots of things. We can look at this in another way. People have said, OK, we can't afford them. What's happening in Britain at the moment is local authorities have had lower and lower local taxes. But I think it is a problem everywhere, that community taxes just need to spread further and further, and toilets are seen as something you can drop or charge for quite highly. So that what's happening in Britain is there's creeping privatisation with charges of, quite significant charges, £1, £1.50, depending on where you are. And that's not acceptable, because it means that it's a tax on the poor, and it's a tax on people who work on the streets for whatever reason. And it's a tax on tourists, which we all want to encourage, good quality tourism. So I think in terms of the health and livelihood of our civilization, it's really puzzling to me. It doesn't cost much to provide good toilets. And, we could design them with all sorts of ideas like water saving, with health promotion notices, with water hydration points. But I think there's all sorts of ideas we haven't explored. Why are we not designing toilets for the 21st century and experimenting with designs? What about a special area for children's toilets with nice small toilets and with basins where they can wash their hands properly? I mean, we've all seen kids in toilets not able to reach the sink, and so they don't wash their hands properly. All sorts of issues that why are they being ignored when it's such a simple, cheap thing that any country can really do?
Dr Rosalind Stanwell Smith is our guest today, and we're talking potty parity, our favourite subject here at Fair Play. Let's talk about the Basin Reserve. So over the last sort of nearly 2 years, we've been on this campaign to try and get equal access to toilets. They're currently redesigning the new museum stand, they're earthquake strengthening it, and they've just redesigned the toilets. In there's a total of 8 dedicated female stalls, 5 dedicated male stalls, and 5 stalls that are available to both men and women. And in addition, there are male urinals. There's also 3 gender-neutral accessibility toilets. But because there's urinals, and there's quite a lot of urinals, that means that more men can still go to the bathroom more than women. Do we actually need urinals anymore? Should we just have stalls instead?
Well, I think that you'll find a lot of men will tell you it can be quite embarrassing in a men's public toilet. Some men are nervous about going into a toilet in a rough area. And I think... you get all those jokes about men looking sideways at each other and so on. I think in a civilized world, surely we could have cubicles. It's what you have at home. I mean, you don't have a urinal next to the bathroom for all the boys in the house. And I think it was brought in, let's face it, in the Victorian era, at a time when they didn't think they had to provide them for women, and they actually had very few cubicles. So the idea was that men would just use urinals, and then I don't know what they were supposed to do with the rest, go home and use the little shed at the back of the house, I don't know. But basically, it was a long time before the flushing toilet came in with the seated toilet. And then they devised flushing for urinals. But I would have said they're an out-of-date concept, just as the female urinal, the urinette, which was a little tiny little thing, like a toddler toilet. And it was designed for women with long dresses, so they would just sort of position themselves over it. And as you can imagine, it was very difficult for women to use these. and they were very difficult to clean. And a lot of authorities closed them off. And they said, oh, well, it's no point in providing urinals for women because they can't use them. And I think, yes, let's go back to this. Let's ask a fundamental question. In terms of modern design, have we outgrown the urinal?
How do we talk about toilets without getting all, squirmish about it? Because whenever it's a topic that I raise with anyone, it's like, oh yeah, I've become a slight expert on toilets. I'm like, I don't want to talk about toilets.
I know. I mean, why is it embarrassing? Why, in perhaps the English-speaking world, do we make jokes all the time about it? I think we don't mind talking about people who don't have toilets in India and getting all moved and, maybe supporting the charities. But when it comes to our own backyard, we do go all squeamish. I think it has been called the last taboo. There's almost nothing we can't now discuss on the television, on the radio, but actually you'll find that discussing toilets and what people do in toilets is still a taboo. It is difficult to get an intelligent conversation. When I do talks, and I did loads when I was actively campaigning, I've been doing campaigning for about 15 years, I found people would snigger as I got up to speak. And you feel like saying, well, shall I tell a few toilet jokes, to get the audience on my side? I have suggested even that we get everybody to send in their favourite toilet jokes, and then you broadcast them with a message about 50% of people don't drink enough because they're worried they can't find a toilet. And 3/4 of people think there aren't enough public toilets. And people are actually not taking their children out because they're afraid there won't be. So we could use those things. And I suggested an architecture competition. Now, I've had cards from New Zealand with beautiful public toilets on. So I think you're ahead of us. And I think we should do a lot more international comparison. Let's have a look at what the States are doing. They're the ones who brought in potty parity. And it is beginning to sort of spread through the world, although it's a horrible expression, isn't it? It's interesting that one would always have thought of the States as being the last place where you'd find good public toilets. I'd love to see New Zealand demanding publicly better toilets because we would be grateful for other countries giving us some support. We would say that there are ways of funding them. I know we've touched on that, but I think it's crazy to say we can't afford them. If we can afford schools and pavements and street lighting we can afford public toilets.
Dr Rosalind Stanwell Smith, who's part of the UK's research into public toilets called Taking the Piss. We'll bring you another update on the toilets in next month's Fair Play. Also, interestingly this week, the Royal and Ancient Golf Course. I don't know if you have read about this.
No.
They only allowed women to join in about 2014, 2015. They have announced this week it will finally build on-site changing rooms for women.
Good grief. What an incredible forward movement.
Oh,
for women.
amazing. They've had to go off course to use changing facilities. I mean, this is an ongoing issue. It's an issue that we spoke about earlier, but that was also one that I talked to a lot of people about at the Women and Girls in Sport Summit. But I just thought that was hilarious. And, back then in 2014, 2015, they're like, yes, we're going to welcome women onto the golf course, but they can't get changed yet.
And that is, as we know, the lack of changing rooms is a real deterrent to especially teenage girls to play sport. Mm-hmm. And it can even come down to something as simple as not having hairdryers for girls that they, and let's face it, girls usually have to train at sports grounds when boys have finished. They usually get put on the back fields where there's no lights. And, they sometimes have to wait for changing rooms till the guys have finished. And so that doesn't encourage girls to keep playing sport, does it?
No, it doesn't. So, I mean, this is definitely an issue that is ongoing, and it's something that we will continue to address. So we need to head off. Hopefully in the November episode, Suzanne, we'll be talking to Dr Tony Bruce, who's been doing a whole lot of stuff around the Rugby World Cup, which has been dominating sports news, except for at Locker Room at the moment. I know it's men's sport, and we don't often talk about men's sport here, but before we go, I mean, do you think that it's kind of been overkill, the amount of coverage that's been dedicated to the Rugby World Cup here in New Zealand?
Absolutely. The problem with the Rugby World Cup is that it's spread out over such a long period of time. And, in those early games, the All Blacks played their biggest game of the pool play first. And then, their games were about a week apart. And it's like the media want to keep people interested in it. And so they're writing these stories that really would never see the light of day at any other time of the year. Yeah, I mean, it's overkill, but I guess we forget about that as it gets closer to the end and it gets more exciting. But yeah, it has been, I've noticed it has been at the expense of other sports, especially women's sports. I think it's real that women's sports coverage has suffered in the last 6 weeks. But, this is, again, men making decisions about what men might want to hear or read. And I think that they're not reading their audience properly.
Well, their audience is shifting, isn't it, as well? So, yes, I'll be very fascinated to chat with Tony in November. We'll bring you all of the updates from there. It's been so wonderful, Suzanne, having you in the studio, chatting with us for this episode of Fair Play. We hope that you come back soon.
Oh, of course, if you'll have me. I just love talking to you. It's like sitting around a table, drinking a nice glass of wine in front of a fire when I talk to you, Zoe. So.
Oh, I'm so glad. We always have a good time when we get together. I also want to say we're in good company this month as well. Big thanks to guests Dr Nicole La Voi, Beatrice Faumuina and Dr Rosalind Stanwell. And thank you for joining us. You can join the conversation at RNZ, at Locker Room and at Wisp Sports. I'm Zoe George. Don't forget to play hard, but play fair.